Hello students, Navankor Vidyapit welcomes you in Digi Lessons. Today we shall read about snapshots, supplementary reader in English for class 11th core course. Revision of chapter 2nd, the address. Question answers first. What was the response of Mrs. Darling towards the author narrator when she visited her for the first time? Answer. When the narrator visited Mrs. Darling's home, she behaved very rudely and unfriendly. The narrator went her home in the search of her mother's belongings. Mrs. Darling denied recognizing her. She told her that she could do nothing for her. Second, what explanation did Mrs. Darling give while taking the belongings of Mrs. S? Answer. Whenever Mrs. Darling visited Mrs. S, she took away some articles with her. She said her that she would save all the belongings of her. Third, who was Mrs. Darling? Mrs. Darling was a broad-backed woman and was an old acquaintance of Mrs. S, whom she hadn't seen for years. She had suddenly recollected and renewed their contact. She was a very rude and ungrateful lady. She took away all the precious belongings of Mrs. S, and she had no intention to return the belongings. 4. What did Mrs. S ask her daughter to remember? Mrs. S asked her daughter to remember the address number 46 Marconi Street to remember because Mrs. S had given her precious items to Mrs. Darling so that she could keep safe them in her house. It happened because one day the narrator noticed that most of the items from her house were missing and she asked her mother about it. Question number 5. Why was the narrator oppressed? When the narrator was successful in entering Mrs. Darling's house the second time, she felt horrified. Her belongings were lying arranged in a tasteless manner with the ugly furniture. A muggy smell prevailed in the room. She was embarrassed to look around. The strange atmosphere oppressed her. Question number 6. What was the narrator's first impression about Mrs. Darling? Answer. Mrs. Darling was an old acquaintance of Mrs. S. She trusted her completely. She believed in her selflessness, but the narrator was not. When the narrator saw that some of the stuffs were missing, she asked her mother. Her mother told her that she had handed over all her precious items to Mrs. Darling. The narrator was initially apprehensive about Mrs. Darling, but the rebuking look from her mother was enough to drop the topic. Her first encounter with her was a brief one. She could only catch a glimpse of her broad back. Question number 7. How did the narrator feel that she had rung the wrong bell? How was she assured that she was at the right place? When the narrator rang the bell, the woman opened the door. She was staring at her. She refused to recognize the narrator. The narrator felt that she had rung the wrong bell, but when she suddenly saw that the woman was wearing a wooden cardigan knitted by her mother, then she assured herself that she was at the right place. Question number 8. Justify the title of the story, The Address. The author, Marga Minko, has logically titled this story, The Address. The two characters in this story, the narrator and her mother, were victims of the war. The war had uprooted her. The narrator's mother gave her precious things to Mrs. Darling at 46 Marconi Street. Now the narrator's mother was no more when the narrator went to take her things to Mrs. Darling. She deigned to recognize her. The narrator thought that the true owner of those precious things was no more. She resolved to forget them and also the address where the things lay. Thank you, students. You have to write and learn these question answers. Thank you.